So welcome again to this exciting and unusual seminar, which will be conducted by two European projects who join forces to tackle some of the most pressing issues that we all face today, who are working on the fields of bringing science closer to society, closer to the relevant challenges of our times. My name is Annette Klinkert. I'm the director of the European Science Engagement Association, UC. UC is a network of public engagement professionals, practitioners in the field, and we all face these issues of upcoming new trends and methodologies and of upcoming challenges to solve. And this is what we are going to do together now to talk about citizen science and responsible research and innovation based on two European projects. One is the ResBios project, which is embedding responsible research and innovation practices within 4 universities across Europe in the fields of biosciences in 4 European countries, developing grounding actions for RRI, making it sustainable within institutions. A very complex, a very challenging task this project aims to tackle. The second project that is in the room today and is bringing in expertise is the StepChange project, which is striving to implement 5 citizen science initiatives in the fields of health, energy, and environment. And I'm sure you will hear more about the projects when our colleagues are introducing them. But I'm now very happy to introduce our first speaker. I will introduce all the speakers as they will come in the agenda. And the first speaker is certainly someone who has shaped the whole area of responsible research and innovation from the very beginning within the European Commission and shaping the last programs, but also the upcoming Horizon Europe programs. This is Dr. René von Schomberg, who is a philosopher and a science and technology studies scholar. He's a senior research fellow at the Hamburger Kolleg, an international center for advanced studies in the cultures of research at RWTH University in Aachen in Germany. He's also a guest professor at the Technical University of Darmstadt and the first editor of the most comprehensive book on responsible research and innovation up to date, the International Handbook on Responsible Innovation. And I can say that we know each other from the Nucleus project, which was a 4-year project striving to implement RRI into the governance of universities across Europe. And I keep quoting René actually in so many proposals that we develop when it comes to open innovation processes, and we keep coming back to your definition. So I'm very happy to have you with us, and the floor is yours. I'm looking forward to all your comments and questions that you may have. Post them in the chat, as Chris has said earlier. We will come back to them afterwards. But so that I don't waste your time with a long introduction, I will hand over right away to René von Schomberg.
Thank you so much, Annette. So I will immediately share the screen and not to waste too much time on these technicalities. I hope this time I do it right. It should be on now. Is it okay, Annette, the screen? And
yes, it's working now, René. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, and Christopher also very. I'm very delighted to be with you. Of course, with 2 projects at the same time. I'm also eager to learn from you. So, you know, I give a warning for the moderators. I tend to talk too long, so you can put me short. It's not a problem because I like to hear from you as well. So. If I get lose my time, please warn me.
We'll keep track, and I will disrupt you if needed.
Yeah, okay. That you are happy. You're most welcome to do that. There's no problem with that. So what I will do though, in then sort of a bird's eye view, to go very quickly to some major steps of what I see as essential of RRI. And hint out, of course, to some elements which are relevant for your both projects, you know, the role of citizens and citizen science. So I hope this will be informative for you. let me start. So let me first just recapture why we actually want to have RRI. I don't think we have much RRI around yet. It should be, it is in fact, as far as I'm concerned, a normative political response on the current deficits of the global research and innovation system. And there are 6 elements or 6 deficits, you could say, which RRI should fill up. And I will just mention all 6 of them, but I will not go into detail in all of them, of course, because of kind of time constraints. Now, I think the most important one is that I think we don't have really governance mechanisms for the outcomes of science and technology, or what I have called 10 years ago, what are the right outcomes of science and technology. We do have a lot of governance mechanisms on quality or efficacy or the risk of technological products which enter the European market. But there is a typical division of roles in our institutions, and that is that the governance of risk is allocated to the state, where the governance of the outcomes of science and technology is very much left over to the market. And what is on the market, or what is success on the market, is more or less equalized with a benefit for society. And this is, of course, a major shortcoming in our institutional arrangements. On this one, I will go in more detail, of course. This is very important. So we do have actually market failures when it comes to delivering on societal desirable outcomes in terms of innovations. We may have a lot of innovations, but they are not necessarily all societal desirable. And those who are desirable don't come quickly enough on the market. So a further deficit, I think, is that science and technology and innovation policy is not sufficiently aligned with shared public values, or even the public values which we have enshrined in our European treaties. Now, I think we have in research and innovation policy traditionally very much a focus on the technological potentials of all kinds of new technologies. And we seem to aim at maximizing those potentials with the view on maximizing as well the macroeconomic benefits for society. But we don't focus on the social desirable objectives, in fact. And RRI is much on shifting our focus towards those. And of course, I will go into that then as a major point for RRI. Now, another element which came up more recently under the Muda's reign of DC research, and that is open scholarship or open science at what is called open science at the European level, with the idea to make science more reproducible and efficient, and also more responsive to societal challenges, which are now, of course, a major focus in the new European framework program, Horizon Europe. And finally, we lack anticipatory governance mechanisms both in the policy making sphere and at other levels in our society, which would allow us to give direction to innovation, because innovation very much is directionless in our society, and this is what RRI needs to address. Now, these are the 6 points. I will first go into the aspect of open science and scholarship, open science and scholarship. Let me hit to what I see as 2 types of crises in science. One crisis in science is that we apparently cannot reproduce sufficiently the data of publication, which are underlying publications, even not of those publications in so-called high impact journals. We see that 90% of the second stage clinical trials actually fail because of the data are not sufficiently robust. In Nature, 70% of the data could not be reproduced by the colleagues of authors who wrote articles in Nature. So this is a major issue. If a so-called high impact journal, and most of it, what is published there, is not reproducible, then you can think of what the state of science actually is. Now, this is associated with a more major crisis, in my view, and less a crisis which is less addressed as far as I can see it, and that is that we are actually not productive in producing social desirable outputs. And if you look to some aspects of this so-called productivity of science, then you see actually that we have to put ever more money into the research and innovation system in order to get some innovation out of it. And even then, we see that, well, this is a rough calculation at the American sides, that actually every 9 years, the outputs are more than half. So, and just to make the story short, I think the last 20 years, we did not have new antibiotics, although it's very necessarily, and we don't address the major diseases on Earth. For instance, malaria, we have no solutions for it. And there is a productivity crisis. So, and this has to do with that science is too closed. And this has to do with how we incentivize research and innovation, and also how we organize research and innovation. So one element of RRI, I think, and it's a precondition for RRI, is that we have to get the science right, and that we have to get the science geared towards innovations which we would like to see. And that means that we have to change our incentives. Now, if you look to the current system, let's say what is the dominant version of how science is organized, is around, in fact, that science is very competitive in terms of getting funding, and about scientists competing with each other in terms of arriving at achieving scientific prestige. It's all also what you know about publishing as fast as possible, whereby excellence is serves as a criterion, an undefined criterion, and also a self-referential criterion, because it's the criterion is decided on case-by-case decisions in science itself. It's backed up with a metrics or indicator systems to incentivize science researchers to produce as much as possible in terms of outputs in publications. And this leads to the fact that researchers are under pressure to produce a lot, but that the system of science itself becomes actually more unproductive. This is what I call the paradox in our current system. We press researchers very much to produce a lot, but it doesn't lead to social desirable outcomes. Now, as always, unfortunately, we need a crisis to make progress. And COVID-19 actually helped open science about, and also helped RRI in focus. In my life in the commission, it was always very much an uphill struggle to get RRI even on the agenda. But now it's more or less an open door because we had faced a crisis. And it was obvious for everybody that if we don't change the incentive system of science, we would never get the vaccine which we all wanted to have about. Now, it's all about not letting scientists compete with each other or setting them up against each other, but letting them collaborate with each other. So that means, of course, sharing knowledge and data as early as possible in the research process. And with that view, we have achieved in a very short time a vaccine within 1 year, which otherwise would probably have cost us 10 or even 20 years. That would be a normal time track under the usual circumstances. So in other words, to make this story short, I think we have to incentivize researchers more towards particular behavior than towards particular outcomes. And that behavior is simply sharing knowledge and data as early as possible in the process. Of course, this goes at the cost of original publications, where researchers traditionally are after. But we have to think more in how we can collaborate with each other in order to deliver on research missions. And I will come back on the notion of research missions, especially with a view on the engagements of citizens which are necessary in there. But let me just show you the picture of open science in its full detail. And I think open science has actually two elements. That's openness towards resources, but always so as knowledge and data, but also openness to actors. And that means openness in terms of collaboration with other knowledge actors beyond the academic realm. And I think if you look to the left square here, the open research agenda, then I think this is something which we have to think about in terms of our new futures in Horizon Europe, namely the research missions, that the input of citizens, which of course are welcome at different fronts, but what is less practiced up till now is that citizens would co-define the research agenda as such. So in other words, what topics we should research and what direction research we want to give. This is an element of open science which already bridges us to RRI, because it's all about getting the right social desirable outcomes. And so we have now the new slogan in Horizon Europe, co-design and co-creation of research. But I think defining and co-defining the open research agendas is very important. And I think this is still too little practiced. But of course, we have now an opportunity with the research missions. So, you know, we have now practiced open science in a relative radical way, unforeseen up till now at a global level. My point is simply now why we not apply it to all publicly funded research, notably when it comes to SDGs, because they are equally urgent as COVID-19. And we only can make progress in this direction if we open up science. Okay, then let me then, for time reasons, you know, close off this part. So open science is a necessary condition for RRI, but not yet a sufficient one. The other part is all about the public governance of the economy. And I think when it comes to innovation, I think we as citizens are more subject to change than agents of change. And this is, of course, where citizen science and the participation, or not just participation, the active involvement of citizens becomes relevant. We want to become agents of change. We want not to see innovation running over us, but we want to shape them, give them a direction. So this is where RRI is all about. Driving as a driving force, we have to organize actually our system in such a way that it becomes a driving force for social desirable innovations. And that means nothing less than a new paradigm for innovation. So one aspect we already dealt with, that is the reorganization of how we fund, organize, and do research. But this also is relevant for the economy. And one element which is of course important here now, again with reference to COVID, is that we have to leave the restraints on patenting and intellectual property rights, because if we start using property rights in the discovery process, then we stifle innovation rather than making it productive for our society. There's much more to say to that, but I just want to hint out to this element of RRI, which is actually still too less addressed also in our programs. Now let me finalize my talk with another element which is crucial for RRI, and this is what I call value-driven innovation. Actually, traditionally, a research and innovation policy is the only policy at the European level which is not clearly value-driven. We have a lot of fundamental values shared at the European level, including sustainable development, equality of men and women, even solidarity with less fortunate people in the whole world. These are all key values which are enshrined in our treaty and which drive to a considerable extent all kinds of European policies, from the environmental even to the trade area, but it doesn't touch upon research and innovation sufficiently. So my case for RRI was always, we have to do the same for research and innovation. Research and innovation should not be a goal in itself. And I want to show you some things because some bridges, that sounds a little bit weird maybe, but the tendency in science is that sciences, especially the bioscience, you are in one of your projects, the ResBios, is on the biosciences, and we see there a development in which the sciences become ever more enshrined into an engineering perspective. I talked to Venter in 2012, who gave a keynote speak in Dublin on the talk, What is Life? And he said, we can only understand life when we create it. And he had the idea of when we can digitalize life processes completely, then we can also remake them. And that's a very radical engineering view on life, of course. But you see this element throughout the sciences, from the physical science to the biosciences. And that means that the responsibility of the research becomes ever more clear in that the research actually is part of a process where intentional outcomes in what you actually want to achieve. And this is a famous example or an infamous example of a bridge, of bridges actually, who were made in the 1930s in Long Island near New York. And they were built deliberately low in order not to allow public buses to pass. And public buses were used by primarily Afro-American citizens and who could then not go to the beaches. So this was called, what you can say, racist beaches. Now this is an alternative situation. I name it alternative because what you see here is the Eastern Scheldt storm surge barrier in the Netherlands. And that's a barrier which has been made to protect, of course, the country against the sea. But if you would have a normal dike, then this would have an impact on the inner sea, what you see on the right-hand side, that would have become otherwise sweet water, with an impact on tourism, with an impact on fisheries, with an impact on agriculture. It would have changed the situation completely. This is why they have designed over a period of 20 years a bridge which has some open barriers which you can open and which normally is always open. It's very costly, but was a compromise among stakeholders, so farmers, tourist industry, and public authorities who arrived in a consensus-making process to make such a bridge. So again, you see
René,
that yes.
René,
Yeah.
we have about 1.5 minutes left.
Okay, then I'll finish it off.
You.
Okay, then I'll go. Thank you for. I invited you to do that. Thank you, Annette. I will close it up. So what you see here is, in fact, the reflection of values in the construction of this bridge. Now, then because Annette warned me rightly so I think just to summarize it, and maybe let me just let's highlight then the aspect of mission-oriented research in Horizon Europe, because that's a new feature. And the interesting thing is that these missions are geared towards social desirable objectives, not technological objectives. And this, the whole slogan is indeed what I already announced: co-creation and co-design. And this is where the input of citizens becomes very important. As I mentioned, in terms of open science, of giving input to the research agenda, but also further input to how and monitor how this research further develop. It's an opportunity for what I would say is an element of anticipatory public governance. And to summarize this all, we have, I think, open research I mentioned, value-driven research I mentioned, public governance, and then which I did not touch upon sufficiently is the institutionalization of foresight and technology assessment. But we have also to discuss what I would call alternative futures of research and innovation. And we have to do this early on. And again, there is an element of citizen input enormously important about this discussion of alternative futures. I mentioned also this aspect. I wanted to use this talk to mention those aspects where citizen science and citizen engagement is yet insufficiently clear, but enormously important. So these things I want to highlight: involvement in the research agenda, and of course also deliberation on alternative futures, for which of course public authorities need to have a proper governance mechanism. And so, okay, this is the end of the story. Not completely. So my advertisement book, Annette already referred to it, but maybe more easily is just to download stuff from my website. And I will make a reference to the website in the chat. Sorry for going a little bit over the 20 minutes then, but thanks for warning me, Annette. And thank you for your attention. I'm very pleased to be with you.
Thank you very much, René, for this excellent presentation. I'm sure we could listen for 1 and 2 hours to what you have to say, because this is so influential to all of us in our work. And some of us may argue, okay, if we look at the new upcoming funding lines or even Horizon Europe, you may not even find the term RRI anymore. So some people may argue, okay, let's get rid of this. It's too complex, no one is using it. But as René has shown, all this terminology is now being called open science, open innovation, co-creation, societal engagement. And this is deeply embedded into all upcoming funding scenarios that researchers will face. It's even, as Linda and Farah, a policy officer in Brussels, told us last year, societal engagement is now considered part of the excellence criterion under methodology in proposal evaluation. So it's even more than the impact section now. It's part of the excellence criterion for all research coming up. So this is a really exciting development. And René, you really paved the ground for this. So thank you again for the work you've done, which is opening up the research process, opening up our minds as we engage with the public. And I think we will learn now in more examples how this can be implemented in practice, which is really not as easy as it may seem, because this is challenging the excellence of research. It's challenging the behavior of academics and a year-long way of socializing researchers. So I think there's a lot to be done. And we are very happy to have 2 excellent projects who actually work on implementing RRI and citizen science into practice. I don't see any questions in the chat now, but feel free to ask them while the other speakers are presenting. And I hope, René, you can stay with us for a bit more time so that we can involve you in the discussion afterwards. But thank you very much for this really inspiring input, and I hope we can share the slides so that you can have access to them afterwards and read through them. It's totally worth it, and you will find a lot of good quotes you can use in all ways of arguing for co-creation and citizen participation. So thank you so much, René, for this wonderful input. I will now, since time is so short, go right away to our second speaker, who is not Carla Montesano, who couldn't make it, but thankfully Daniele Mezzana is stepping in. Thank you for this last notice, flexibility, and that you're joining us today. Daniele is working at Knowledge and Innovation, KNI in Rome, Italy. He's a researcher in science, innovation and society, communication, adult education and sociological theory, with a lot of experience in open innovation and engagement and citizen participation. And Daniele is deeply involved in the ResBios project with the University of Rome, Tor Vergata. So Daniele, please let us know more about your experiences with this important topic.
I'm sorry. Do you see?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Thank you. So I'm prepared together with Carla. Unfortunately, she cannot be here with us. Some consideration, some experiences about RRI, or similar approach, and public engagement in the ResBios project. ResBios project aims to root RRI practices in 4 research organizations in the field of biosciences, in Barcelona, in Lviv, Ukraine, my heart and our heart with them now, in Alexandropolis, Greece, and in Zagreb, Croatia, through 15 grounding action in this field, together with the stakeholders of the quadruple helix. So public participation of citizens is a part of this process, as well as the participation of researchers, decision makers, and companies. Starting point, as we have seen with René, there are strong changes within science, new forms to produce and share knowledge, with a strange dialectics between competition and cooperation. Competition, publish and perish, competition for having funds, and cooperation, as we have seen in the COVID-19 research. And we see an increasingly problematic relationship between science and society, for instance, in terms of trust. And biosciences are at the core of all that. Big investments, fast developments, big technologies, new emerging social and ethical issues, pandemics, environmental crises, and so on. And RRI is one of the possible way to have some control, a governance over this process, at least at our level, promoting some grounding action, in the case of ResBios project, to trigger a sustainable institutional change and favoring a stronger science. One of main themes for us is mutual learning. Complex issues of the contemporary world related to biosciences, pandemics, environment, nutrition, can be faced only involving inclusively the knowledge and the competencies of many actors, both researchers and non-researchers. We need mutual learning to exercise a co-responsibility, as René mentioned before. Within this framework, just some few examples of ResBios grounding action on public participation among other RRI keys action. For instance, in Barcelona, the Institute de Sciences del Mar, the Marine Ocean Institute, they underline the benefits of a larger vision and approach, an approach of based on science with society. They use the approach of the ocean responsibility. For instance, the project Gorgonia Barcelona, doing the same studies normally done only by marine scientists, but in collaboration with volunteers from the Federation of Catalan Subaquatic and other actors. They work also in contact with other local actors, for instance, to promote sustainable tourism. They made scientific education in school and so on. They are among the participants today, and they can provide further details in case. The Democritus University of Thrace in Alexandropolis, they promoted the co-creation of permanent education agenda with the prefecture, and as well as seminars with the public on science, activities in secondary schools, and so on. And for them, COVID-19 was both a big disgrace, of course, and an opportunity for public communication on molecular biology, online and offline response to growing curiosity, to provide a response on these issues. They need to promote a stronger science today in its relations with the rest of society, but also in its internal mechanism. This is very important. The public participation in RRI as well as in other similar approaches, is not only a relationship between research and the outside world. In our case, participation is often also within the research process itself. For instance, the research on gender issues in health, the collaboration between citizens and biologists for studying zoology, agreement with companies for anti-plagiarism software to be used in research and education programs, as experimented in Croatia and in Ukraine, even if with growing difficulties, as you can imagine. ResBios gives importance also to mentorship. That is, RRI experienced partners help teams using RRI for the first time, and the multidisciplinarity, for instance, collaboration between biologists and communicators, psychologists, sociologists, and so on. In conclusion, the project is underway within the framework of the COVID-19 pandemics, and we had to apply, among the others, the RRI dimension of responsiveness, facing the challenges, for instance, using online tools for participation. This was a handicap, but also an opportunity for enlarging the range of the interlocutors. Science is a complex process. It lies within a large context and receives many pressures, science policies, fundraising, agenda setting, public opinion on science, internal and public communication, and so on. And citizens are an integral part of this context, influencing science, and can be involved within the scientific process itself, of course, in a rigorous way and adopting adequate methods. But it's another story. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Daniele, for this quick and just-in-time presentation. This was really valuable to see how you put this complex approach of RRI into practice. And I like your emphasis on the internal mechanism, because if the system doesn't change, then this whole new approach of RRI will have no chance to be implemented. If the notion of excellence is still on publications or perish, this model that you showed, then RRI will really have a difficult time, and open innovation as well, as is the new model. We will now, since I don't see a question in the chat yet, we will now listen to other examples from other research fields. And the next speaker I would like to welcome is Dr. Elena Woojan. She works in the field of population and conservation genetics, phylogeny, and nature protection at the University of Primorska. And she's the leader of the StepChange project, so the other project that is hosting this webinar today. And both are Horizon 2020 projects, and this one started only in 2021, so it's rather new. She's part of the ResBios team and has also worked on the StarBios project. So a lot of the experts in the room today, they have experience in multiple Horizon projects trying to implement RRI and citizen science. So I'm very happy to have you here, Elena, and the floor is yours.
So thank you to all. Thank you, Annette, for my presentation, and thank you. I'm really happy to be with all of you today and try to connect the lesson we learned, the knowledge we can share from the StepChange project, which is the first year of the realization, and the ResBios project, which we already heard by Daniele. We have a lot of already output done in that project. So the StepChange project, are the general objectives are to explore and implement the potential of the citizen science, and in terms of knowledge and innovation, and also in advancements of science and society, like René really stressed today, that the science together with the citizens can become a research agenda of scientists. Then we'd like to do the development and evaluation of the citizen science initiative in 3 different areas, which can be included as a bioscience. These are the energy, health, and environment. And we heard today that these are the areas which are really under the huge development, but maybe also, at least some of them also under the lack of trust of the society. And we try to do this through Europe and also in Africa through the Citizen Science Initiative in 5 countries in Slovenia, Germany, Italy, UK, and Uganda. At the end and the next 2 years, we would like to formulate a recommendation and tool for better anchoring of the citizen science in the field of these three quite diverse but also quite connected field. So we are the consortium of 11 partners, most of us coming from European Union, but we also have 2 partners from Africa and UK. So the Citizen Science Initiative we are trying to develop as a small pilot project in which we try to engage citizens to also become a part of the research agenda are the Citizen Science Initiative with wildlife monitoring in Slovenia. Then we have 2 Citizen Science Initiatives connected with the health part. One is the non-alcoholic fatty liver disease in UK, and another one is working on infection disease outbreak preparedness, which is also a consequence of the COVID-19 we already heard today. And the last 2 initiatives are connected with the energy. One is on energy communities in Germany, and another one is on renewable energy adoption in Uganda. So when we are settled down our project, first of all, we try to justify our vision as a bioscientist, because most of us who are working on Citizen Science Initiative, we are bioscientists, we are not social scientists, and we saw that the citizen science is this important participatory approach developed in the recent year in the broader field of the public engagement, and that it connects people with a different background. So we try to do the practice of science in the different spotlights, openings to science, also to live people from a different backgrounds outside this, I would say, exclusive club of science. And then the next steps is the most advantage and in the front of us is this responsible citizen science. So which we also heard today that the citizen science has to be responsive to society by including stakeholders in the identification and the management of the relevant research priorities, methods, and outcome. We do know that the citizen science state on 10 important principles which were published by EXA in 2015, and we recognize them as the 2 circles which are really connected together. The first one is really encompasses the range of different level of the citizens' engagement, from encourage them to participate in the scientific process by observing and gathering data, so by collecting the data from the field, up to involving them into designing and implementation of the citizen science project. So if you look around this first circle on the left side, you will see the citizen science participation, the multiple stage, going to the side that we involve citizens in different scientific effort and in the research approach. And the next circle is connected with the legal and ethical issue. So all the research outcome, which is already involve also citizens and collected data and metadata, should be public, so should become a part of the open science, and citizens should be acknowledged, and all programs and research outcomes should be evaluated. So keeping all of this in mind, we saw today the René represent the different bridges, and we also see this bridge between citizen science and RRI. Especially, we need to stress that this bridge has to be open, not closed, like we saw the first one, because on the one side, citizen science is really working on to engage the different stakeholders, the societal actors, from the business, from the decision maker, from civil society, and many others, to co-create research idea and research outcome, to become inclusiveness, not just for the scientists, but also for citizens, and also to create a co-responsibility between the society and the scientists in the field of the bioscience and broader. And of course, this all needs to be open and sustainable. On the other hand, the 6K of RRI involve responsible actors, which we recognize in citizen science them as engagement stakeholders and engaged citizens, and of course, research institution. And we also recognize the public engagement and education as this important factor in citizen science, because citizens need to be trained, need to be engaged, need to know how to collect the data, and the data need to be validated by them and by the scientists, because just collecting the data by citizens, we are not sure that these data have also scientific outcome and background. And of course, the last part, which is also very important part, it's a part of the citizen science, 10 principles of the citizen science, and also of the RRI, is it's ethical requirements, we need legal requirements, societal needs which need to be filled, and sustainability. So having this in mind, we can say that objectives and outcome of RRI considerably overlap with the 10 principles of the citizen science, because citizen science projects should focus on real societal problems. They need to engage public. They need to involve responsible actors and responsible institutions. On different, the level of engagement can be different, from encouraging citizens to participate in the scientific process by observing the data, or up to involving them into the design and implementation of a citizen science project. And exactly this last part, to involving to engage the stakeholders and citizens into our citizen science initiative, was the most difficult part also in our citizen science action in these 5 different countries and in 3 different areas. But what is really important, that what we really notice in this first year of the project activities, is that all the time the meaningful discussion and training should be done, and of course the dialogue between the scientists and the citizens. So as what we can conclude at the end, I would say in this first year of the StepChange and almost 3 years of the ResBios, we as a scientist come to the conclusion that we need to act responsible and collectively, which means that the citizen science need to reflect contribution in all aspects of research, anticipating possible future use and misuse of research. So not just include citizens as a data collectors, but also as important actors and meaningful actors in the developing citizens' idea, without limiting their thinking with scientific values and needs. And on the other hand, what we also know really important, what we realized through the project, it was the validation of the data which are collecting. So we will have, we heard from the beginning that René said that we really have the issue to get a robust data collection, robust research outcome, and there is in the clinical study we really miss to repeat the experiment. So keep in mind, with involving citizens into the citizen science initiative, there will be increasing amount of scientific data. And this scientific data, especially in some area, like is, for example, conservation nature, should really may have a significant contribution by traditional knowledge, which is stored by citizens. And we need to take care also about this knowledge through the citizen science. And of course, on the other hand, we need to keep in mind that we need to take care of really good training of the citizens to collect the valuable data, to make sure that the outcome will be then valued and really good collected. So this is from my side, and I would like to thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Elena. You actually finished exactly the second when my timer went on. So thank you for this. That's always very good to see. Yes, you opened up another area of the spectrum. So we could see there's a lot of internal innovation needed within academia, challenging this system, but then also the citizens need training. This is what you mentioned. So this is an innovation process bridging all different areas that are involved in open innovation as a system. And I would even go beyond. It's not just the citizens, but if you want to put this innovation into practice, you need policymakers to be part of the process, and administration people to be involved, and urban urban people putting innovation into practice. So while we all agree that this is needed, we see that there's so much training needed on all sides in these different systems and methodologies and even governance models, because all these governance models and academic models are still stuck in the old systems. So I think there's a lot of work to be done by so many of us here, and it's excellent to come together and exchange as much as we can of the knowledge that we gain. Sometimes even the failures could help us to move forward, but I'm very happy to see how RRI is now moving outside of these tubes of these 5 keys. So we have a bit of gender, a bit of open access, a bit of science education, but no, it's now about this changing the ecosystem of innovation as a whole, whereas citizen science also has moved far away from just counting butterflies and now says citizen science is about challenging the system of innovation as well. So we can see how these systems really align and even become one in this new model of open innovation. We have one question which I would like to take up, and this is from Nora Weinberger, who asks, can you please elaborate a bit on what participation of citizens with different background means? So this is interesting.
Yeah.
Does this
Yeah.
also refer to participation of citizens who are often not reached, for example, people with lower social backgrounds? If so, how was this achieved? So very simple question.
Yeah, it can be for us, according to our citizen science initiative, we were thinking about different background because we can even call them professional citizens. So they are the people who are maybe trained 1, 2, 3 years to work in the data collection. And then we have on the other hand citizens without training, special training, which are just starting. So we need to think about that there we have a different background, even though the people who are collecting the data, first of all, collecting the data and then also to establish the research, they can have a different background. As you mentioned, it's a social background, but it can be also a knowledge they can bring from the school, bring from the traditional studies, can be different. And then the participation can really differ. And even the lay people who are maybe not university educated, they can have a really huge traditional knowledge. For example, in zoology or botany, you have a lot of amateur taxonomies who are working there for many years, and they know for sometimes to some part of the taxon group really well, even better than some scientists with a PhD at the university. So this was when we're talking about the background, but as Nora stressed out, it can be also like a lower social background and this kind of issue involved. So this is a really broad area.
So maybe we can come back to this in the discussion later, because there is a big issue about who's legitimizing the citizens and the academics to define the research agenda. So how do we arrange this governance process in a democracy, and who can represent an opinion in all this process? So a big range of questions which we can take up later, but I would first like to bring in our last speaker, who is an absolute expert in citizen science, because she's, so thank you again, Elena, for this wonderful presentation, and hope to have you in the discussion as well later on. So I would now like to bring in Carolina Doran, who is an EXA project officer. EXA is the European Citizen Science Association, who's doing a brilliant work of refining the field, opening it up, showing best practice, and bringing people together all across Europe and beyond in the field. And Dr. Carolina Doran, she's a behavioral ecologist with a special interest in social insects and animal collective behavior. She has a strong focus on public engagement, as I guess many of us do who are joining today. She's the founder of the Berlin Soapbox Science team, and make sure you all have a look at what Soapbox Science is doing. It's an amazing public engagement initiative, and she leads workshops on diversity and inclusion for academics with a focus on public engagement. She is offering support in several open tasks on the final stages of the Dean Knows project, the Panelift, and the EU Citizen Science project. And she will also take the lead of the CompAir and SocioB project. So an absolute expert on the field of citizen science, but also on the European context, which is interesting to all of us in coming together as a community. So please, Carolina, bring in your experience and share them with you.
Thank you, Annette, for a wonderful introduction. You did half of the presentation for me, so I will be,
Sorry.
I will be very quick. No, I'm joking. So I'll start with sharing my screen. I will expand on some of the things you said, and I think I will probably repeat a lot of what has been said already, especially when we're talking about common challenges we all face. I guess it's reassuring to see we repeat ourselves. So yes, I am Carolina Doran, and so what I'm going to do today is a little bit of a different talk, but I'm going to tell you a little bit what kind of challenges we face when we try to put all these things we've been discussing into practice. So aims, challenges, and ways forward. But before I do that, I actually like to tell you a little bit about myself, because I think my career path already highlights some of the challenges the previous speakers have mentioned. So I'm actually originally from Portugal, Lisbon, and I'm currently in Berlin working for EXA, but I have lived in many cities, many different cities. So I've lived in Bristol, in Catanzaro, in Vienna, and all this traveling I did with the aim of pursuing my passion for understanding animal collective behavior better. So I did my PhD in the study of how ant colonies make decisions together. So this is the species of ant I study, which I think is beautiful. They live inside rocks, which makes it, I mean, they actually rock because they're awesome, but it makes it really easy to ask them where they would move if their nest is destroyed. So how do they collectively make a decision? And then what brought me to Germany, to Berlin, was I wanted to understand these patterns better in different animals. And actually through my research, it was very interesting to find how in the literature, lots of knowledge that doesn't exist, you can find from, I read a report in a blog of a bird watcher who found that one specific species of bird was eating the fish from his tank. And this is how we found out that that bird was a predator of the fish we were studying. So I think these anecdotes are always very interesting. And so I was always, throughout my career, always very passionate about communicating my science. And as Annette mentioned, I did bring soapbox science into Berlin, and I co-led the team for a long time. I no longer do since very recently, but soapbox science is a platform that highlights the role of women and non-binary scientists. And we always organize a big event in a public space. And the big aim is, there are two big aims: highlighting the role of women and non-binary scientists, but also to catch the attention of people who wouldn't necessarily go to a science event, who just walking by in this busy area and happen to see us. And I think this is a really strong aspect of this format of science communication. And I have to say, it was my experience in working with this that made me start questioning why I was actually doing science. And I started to realize that sharing my knowledge in high prestigious papers that most people can't afford and will also not understand because of the language we're encouraged to use in them was no longer satisfying for me. And this is when I decided to take a career change. And this is what brought me to EXA. So as Annette said, I have been a project officer since last September at the European Citizen Science Association. And I'll briefly mention some of the projects I have worked or am working on. So PanelFit is one that is almost over, and it's not actually a citizen science project, but it's producing very openly several guidelines that I think will be very, very useful for citizen scientists. They're all different fact sheets that simplify information containing, for instance, in the GDPR, which can be really overwhelming. And we so need to understand it when we're dealing with some types of data. And I'm also working with Compare and Social B, and these are projects that deal with air quality. And they use different methodologies, but the tenet, the basic aim is that of creating communities that care for the air that they breathe and empowering citizens to take more pro-environmental behaviors. Both these projects started very recently. But as I mentioned, I started at EXA. I have been there since last September. So I am actually still learning what citizen science is and what citizen science is not, and also learning what it means to be a citizen science practitioner. So I found this word cloud in the AOC website describing the StepChange project. And seeing things like this make me really happy to be part of the citizen science community, because words like empowerment, inclusion, participation, collaboration was all that was missing for me whilst I was doing my research. And so I feel really rewarding to be part of this community. And when I was actually invited to give this talk, was this notion of co-creation that came to mind, that instead of me saying, hey, actually, I don't have experience, so I'm probably not the best person, I thought that I could reach out to the community and help and ask them to help me compile a set of aims and challenges and ways forward that they have encountered in the projects. So that's exactly what I did. I basically co-created my talk. And so I reached out to the community and I asked for several things, and I tried to summarize them now into a cohesive story. And I hope I remain faithful to what everyone intended with the words that they wrote. So basically, I asked people to share with me challenges, lessons learned, and afterthoughts of the projects, and also what are the aims of their project, just to create for us the space of what people are talking about. So here are some of the aims of those predictions that contributed. So the New York City virus hunters, for instance, conduct safe viral surveillance with the community with the potential to prevent the next pandemic. Very important, as we all are very much aware now. Create long-lasting networks of actors for environmental monitoring and interactive co-creation of solutions to imminent challenges. Understand the impacts of global warming on drying rivers. Work with local citizen scientists and conservation organizations to deploy motion trigger camera traps for wildlife monitoring. Work with local community members to gather data on neglected tropical diseases transmitted by freshwater snails and co-create awareness campaigns that focus on disease prevention in Uganda. And finally, investigate what citizen scientists take away from their participation in projects. Oh, sorry, one more. Ensure that the observations and knowledge of hunters and fishers can be used to improve the basis for environmental management decisions in Greenland. So I then thought, after reading all the challenges that people share, I realized that even though they were connected to their project, they're actually really general. And I think something we all face in many projects, not only in the biosciences field. So I thought, instead of attaching them to each project I just mentioned, I would just categorize them in different focus areas. So engagement, project management, or logistics, funding, or data collection. So these are the challenges that were highlighted. Managing participation's expectations, recruiting and maintaining active participants. Sorry, my screen just froze. Promoting apps and convincing users to continue using them long-term. Retaining some participants for long-term data collection. Keeping networks active after the end of the project. And engagement of high-level decision makers. I feel like all these things have been mentioned in previous talks already today. In terms of funding, lack of funding to both start and sustain citizen science projects long terms. I'm sure this is important more for some topics than others, that we need to collect data long term, and normally projects get funding for very limited time. Funding for financially compensating participants in the Global South. I was really happy to see this because it's not often talked about, and I think we have a responsibility to share the privilege and resources we get in Europe. So I think this is a really important point. Biologists don't always have the best knowledge in terms of social media strategies. And I think this was kind of highlighted in a previous talk before, that, you know, in small projects that don't have a lot of partners with different expertise coming together, you are expected to be able to do everything. And I think this is maybe seen as a small point, but I think it's really important point to also have capacity building in citizen science practitioners. Defining a common vision for a project with many partners. I don't know how many of you have worked with many partners. Even if you write a proposal together, when it comes to the time of implementing it, this can actually be a real challenge to make sure everyone has the same vision and wants to achieve the same things. Logistics of large-scale sampling events. Realistic predictions of risks that projects, so have a realistic prediction of risks so that projects can take this into account and allow mistakes to happen. Because I can't remember, maybe Elena, you mentioned this, that it's important to learn from our mistakes. That's how we learn. enough resources for translations. And I think this is also very important, especially when we're trying to reach hard to reach groups and we want to be inclusive. We shouldn't assume that everyone will understand English. And now on the data collection aspect, finding a good balance between data fit for science and opportunistic sampling. I think this is, again, this written slightly different, balancing the needs of scientific study, needs for citizen science participants, and the needs of a scientifically robust evaluation. So how do we balance what gets everyone excited and involved? Research synthesis across projects is very hard because many projects don't share results, and those who share don't do it in a standardized and compatible way with explicit permission to reuse. I think this is so crucial because if we want to move a field forward, this has to be possible. Otherwise, when the project ends, the knowledge ends with it. To me, this is one of the most crucial challenges, I think. Convince relevant stakeholders to use citizen science data, which I guess is connected to the previous problem, right? And how to design fail-proof data collection methods so that participants can't lie. So going through these challenges, I also asked then contributors to name some of lessons learned. And again, I thought I wouldn't connect them to specific project because I think they are quite general and they're important for every citizen science project. So when you create an attractive opportunity for participation, this is not enough. It is important to know what participants want. So there again, co-creation. Designing a proper engagement recruitment campaign is crucial. The message conveyed determines what kind of people participate and thus influence the outcome of the project. The co-creative process allows the community to be involved in every step of the program, and their ideas can be incredibly helpful for study design and to facilitate a closed feedback loop for the scientific community as well as the general public. Co-creating an app with relevant stakeholders is a successful way to ensure the needs professionals might have are included. Citizen scientists find it important to have access to the data and other outputs from a project. This is an empowering, equitable, and respects the hard work they put in. Some citizen scientists are really put off by institutional scientists taking off their contributions away without sharing. Performance improves greatly after feedback. Local community members can carry out expert tasks if provided with the necessary training. And collaboration over time makes it possible to build trust, to anchor collaboration, clarify goals, and share information and workload to the benefit of the environment, natural resources, and society. I find this all really, really powerful. So this to me tells me that we know the challenges, we know what needs to happen, we just have to do it. Then at the end, I also asked those that contributed to the information in this talk to just share some afterthoughts, some things in their minds. And so this is what we got. I see a shift in the narrative around community science. It seems that now stakeholders get it and are finally incredibly helpful and supportive from the beginning. This has not always been the case. Community science in the biosciences can be complicated. For example, co-creation requires a lot of communication. The involved scientists have data expectations and administrative work can also be high. So co-creation is more work for sure, but it also pays off higher benefits. Words matter, and it is important to consider inclusive terminology. For example, what's the difference between citizen scientist, volunteer, participant, stakeholder, or scientist? It's too easy to come from the ivory tower, and everyone should be more thoughtful about terminology. Citizen science in the Global South may need facilitation, especially financially. I feel we need more evaluation accompanying research to see what works and how. Being able to base discussions and project design on scientifically sound evidence rather than gut feeling is essential for developing the field conceptually and strategically. This requires interdisciplinary collaboration and additional resources. It is still difficult to convince colleagues from hard sciences that yes, citizen science can also produce robust data, maybe different way that they are usually used to. Quality data is also a critical point for which we have not yet found an effective solution. I guess the solution is in the afterthought that I just read before. We need this interdisciplinary research to have evidence of what citizen science can actually do. There needs to be more educational outreach about the critical role of open licenses to enable and encourage sharing reuse of outputs. Without these licenses, sharing and reuse are prohibited by default, even if you publish something online. It is important to not forget project coordination, management, and other skills that facilitate fruitful and successful partnerships between project partners. And co-creating takes more work and it is more time consuming, but it certainly pays off with better and more meaningful results. So I think this is all really powerful, and unfortunately, I don't have the time to discuss each and every point that I raised here now. Hopefully we can have this now in the discussion round. But I wanted to say that collecting all of this has been a great adventure. I felt quite a big weight on my shoulders to represent the citizen science community in this talk. And I also wanted to say that, of course, X is very much committed into strengthening the ties within our community and creating more opportunities for us to work together. And of course, a great example of this is the EU Citizen Science platform, where it's really, truly created by the community for the community. And I wanted to say also that I will be in touch and see how the information that I summarized here in this talk can be used to maybe or expanded to create a useful resource for citizen science practitioners. So what are the common challenges we're facing? What solutions can we come up with together to move this forward? And with that, I'd like to thank everyone that contributed. I know this talk will be recorded, so I'll make sure that the links, I will share the links of those that contributed and the links to their projects. And of course, as always, a big thank you to my team for all their support and the amazing work they do. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carolina, for this excellent summary. And we all know how difficult it is to sum up something as complex as citizen science, but also as responsible research and innovation in one talk in only 20 minutes when it's just so rough. And just to show the bridge between your talks, I just mentioned these two quotes. One is from René von Schomberg, who said that we should move from technological potential to societally desirable objectives. And you mentioned a lot of how this makes sense to bring in different voices into the choir here, and that we should move from seeing scientific excellence as a self-referential criterion to redefining scientific excellence by bringing in these different voices and bringing in these different stakeholders. And this is also what you mentioned, that you see a shift, which I found really interesting, from citizen science to community science. This is one of the feedbacks you gathered. And maybe this is something we could also bring up in our discussion now on whether it's only about bringing in the citizens, or is it about bringing in all these experts that are out there in these innovation ecosystems, activating as many of them as possible, and not just working with the academic side and the lay side on the other hand, which sometimes seems like a misbalance. So any questions, any comments that you may want to share with us? I do see René very large on my screen right now, so why don't you comment on the previous talks?
Well, thank you, Annette. I think the point you just raised reminded me, and I think this was actually throughout all our presentations of today, that the input from citizens in research and innovation is not only about the legitimacy of the research and innovation, which is of course very important, and this was already since the 1960s an issue. But what we see now actually, and it's more recent, and especially in the citizen science projects we have on the table, is that we see that the input of citizens and citizen science also increases the quality of the research. And I find it very appropriate that you refer to the excellence criterion, because I think sometimes people ask the question, for example, what is the difference between science and citizen science? It's both science, let's say. But I always say the difference is, of course, that if you do citizen science, then you have actors in the process who have a stake in the outcome. And that makes the science of a different quality. one element is the RRI element, which I pointed out to, that we give direction to research and innovation, so which is of course what citizens do, because they have a stake in the outcome, they anticipate a particular outcome. And another element is that I think the location where research is done, and you saw it also in these presentations again, that the focus is very often when it comes to input of citizens to the local or regional dimensions. And this is very obvious that this is necessary and raises a quality issue of science, because if you are doing, let's say, climate science, for example, and you work on big models and you study whether it's 1.5 or 2 degrees Celsius temperature rise or something, then these are global models. But how they will work out for, let's say, at city level or at other regional levels, we only know if we get engaged scientists who try to work this out. I have an example of the Netherlands, for example, where there is actually a citizen science university in Amersfoort who exactly did this type of work. So I find it always very interesting. So it's not so it's sort of recapturing what we see now throughout the presentations, that although I missed it in the 10 principles of citizen science in the presentation, but it was implicitly in there, that it's not about legitimacy only, but it's also about quality. And I think I think this is also the reason why citizen science, when the projects have been done well, get the right amount of attention, because it's really something what normal scientists otherwise also wouldn't do. And the climate scientist will not go to a local city study, and he's only interested in global models. So this makes the difference. Citizens will go to areas where normal scientists don't go, and this is the other dimension of it, and I find it very revealing, and I saw it also today again reoccurring in the presentations. I think this is throughout very important.
Mm-hmm. And I think that if we want to make this an integral part of research, which I think is the main idea of all these open innovation concepts, yes, they should be integrated into research. They're no longer a soft skill that you can do on a Saturday afternoon if all the real research is done, or you see it as something that is put onto your shoulders on top of everything else. But if we want to integrate it into the research process, we need high standards ourselves for the way we conduct it. So it was excellent the way you described it, Carolina. The necessity to really plan this strategically and embed it strategically, and not just do it, invite 5 citizens and say, well, that's it, but just really do it in a very strategic way. Any other questions that you may want to bring in?
I have a question, but also Amali has posed a question, so maybe I'll do mine very quickly. It may not be a very quick answer though. So Daniele from the ResBios project mentioned before about the using contributions from society and other actors such as researchers and such to kind of predict alternative futures. I'm just wondering if you could talk a bit more about how these sorts of initiatives could be more proactive in solving problems in the future rather than reactive about obviously issues that are very important right now to society at large, but is there a way of using these principles to be more proactive rather than reactive, perhaps?
The question is going to who?
Oh, anyone who wants to contribute, really. I suppose maybe Daniele to begin with, and then perhaps to the other partners, perhaps.
Mm-hmm.
It's a question to all. Anyway, I think that all this approach make part of a great framework of the crisis in the relationship between science and society. Be proactive. We need to launch this new approach in a systematic way. I mean, citizen science and public participation are ways to restore the link and the trust between science and the rest of society. And we have to systematically launch this this approach, using the principle of a strong link between involvement, experience, knowledge, vision, emotions, learning, and trust, and early involvement since the beginning.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Daniele. Any other comments from the other speakers? If not, Amalia, do you want to bring in your question, which is really interesting that you posted in the chat?
Sure, here I am. Good morning, or better, good afternoon to everybody. I just wanted to ask Carolina something, because during her presentation, she mentioned, in fact, the relevance of inclusive terminology, when it comes to citizen science. And I was wondering, since I'm aware that at HEXA you have a working group on empowerment, inclusiveness, and equity, if you have possibly any suggestion or recommendation for citizen science practitioners on this specific topic, Carolina. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. That's a big question, and I can't claim to speak in name of the working group, but what I can do is, from my own experience, I think for me a key element is to be open to criticism, because when we think about inclusion, it's important to know that we will always be excluding someone, because we're raised in the way we were raised, and there are certain experiences we don't expect. And for me, I find it very problematic when an issue is raised, with a promotional video or with a survey saying, oh, you're not considering this language you're using, that people get defensive. And, to me, the most important way to be inclusive is to be open to criticism and take it as a good thing, because if you're getting it, it's your opportunity to improve. I don't think one can give you the solution. Mm-hmm. Just to include as many voices as possible, do as much co-creation as possible, and be open to the criticism.
But this is an interesting comment, actually, that is related to the whole field of open innovation, or RRI, is that we all should be this learning system. We need to keep being open to change, because if we presume to have all the knowledge, then we are not open to new methodologies, not open to failures, which may be necessary when we redefine the given systems as they are. This is really the time when we haven't built the new house yet fully, but we know the old house isn't longer the place we want to live in. So I think it's a really exciting time where we are moving, but we should be building this house together. And maybe we come up with something really creative with some new rooms. Some of them will be digital, some will be online, some will be on the spot. We may need gardens in which we plant something new. So I think just pretending we have all the knowledge and here's our 10-point action plan is no longer the way to go. And it seems that also Brussels, the Commission, is seeing this and is seeing this as a process that is needed. If you look now at all these competitions on European university alliances or excellence universities, it's all about creating processes of transformation instead of projects. And I really like this approach, and I hope this will be the case also in our EU projects, that we are allowed to enter these processes instead of announcing results in month 25 in year 2 or something, which we may not even have. And this is maybe a challenge within the funding systems as they are now, which are also sometimes stuck in the old definitions of how people should work together based on the old models. And I think maybe also these systems need to be more responsive in the end to allow all these processes to happen and to allow people to work with us who are not from the field of academia, but who may come from the field of decision-making, from administration, from other very important sectors, and that we learn to talk to each other and learn to work with each other. So I guess that's a very important phenomenon. Do we have other questions or comments, or you can share your experiences either within the projects or with your own activities, anything you may want to share with us?
Maybe whilst people think, I could say a statement agreeing with what you just said, Annette. I think from my limited time working in these big European projects, I think it's really important to bridge the gap between what we promise we will do and how we show that we've done it. I think there's a bit of a gap there, that we promise we will reach A, B, and C groups, but then how do we actually measure this? And how I find that these things are not really aligned yet. We need to work better on this.
Yeah, so there's still a lot to do, but it's really exciting to see how all these threads are coming together now. And maybe René, again, since you are working closely connected with the Brussels context, and you know a lot of the colleagues that are working in the field of open innovation right now, do you see any developments that could be interesting for our community that could give us some credibility in what we are doing, or some support? So where do you see this going in Brussels? Do you see this really being integrated, or are these just buzzwords, and actually behind the scenes everything is back to the traditional notion of excellence?
No, thanks, Annette. I think you hit right the sensitive point. I think I think there are two. You know, I just make my own personal diagnosis there. So I'm not sure if I'm completely correct, but I think the situation is as follows. I think there is a very big political momentum to include citizens throughout policies, including research and innovation policy. And I think there is a formal huge input for Horizon Europe to receive input of those citizens, and notably also in emissions. Now, the question is, of course, whether this will be done properly. And I think we have now reached the point, and we did not have ever this point before. This is why that one should realize. I think there is a huge opportunity now to do this, but it can be that, for example, the work in emissions are so complex, and the input is so complex that those who are engaged, for example, with these missions don't know really well on how to handle this input. That, you know, there is of course a community like where you are involved in RRI and in citizen science, who do have certain capacities, but the question is whether these capacities will be used, or whether these learning processes, which we have had in the RRI context, for example, will be really used in the context of the missions. And there I'm a little bit skeptical because of the mere size of these missions and the complexity of it. So I think we are at a sort of crossroad where on the one hand you have a huge opportunity and there is a huge political will to have citizens involved. So there is not something like that people want to get back to the old days or so. I don't think this is the case. So there is a big political will, but I'm not sure if the capacities, those who will have to execute it, will be able to do it well. And this is why I think people like you and in your networks should, should continuously irritate the bureaucracies on saying, well, we are here, we have this capacity, and we monitor what you are doing, and I think you have a good intention, but you don't do it right. Why you not include us? You see, so it is about you have relevant expertise, which is not available across the board. So I think this is the challenge. And for the longer term, I think the whole concept of mission-oriented research, I think, is very promising. Also on open science, I think the theory is pretty good in Horizon Europe right now. It's all about whether it will be practiced well. And this really depends on who will be doing what type of things. So I think this is so I have a sort of ambivalent attitude here. I think there is a huge opportunity, but at the same time, we will face probably situations like that. The projects are so big and that there are researchers involved who, let's say, have to involve citizens, but they would not do it themselves. So they are suddenly faced with a situation which they actually wouldn't like to do from themselves, from their heart, so to speak, but they have to do it. And this can be a disturbing element. So there's also still some outreach to do and some missions to do in terms of educating people. I would almost say that we really have to make a translation into in our work, and this is also why success stories are important. So if you have, for example, and you do have these examples in citizen science where there are success stories and why these successes have been achieved, then this should be well communicated to the top level of these research, so that this becomes known. And that this is very important. So sorry, talking too long. You can cut me short. Sorry about
no,
this.
that's excellent. I would, unfortunately, our time is almost up now, but I would like to close until we haven't had a final sentence from each one of the speakers. So I think, René, you gave us so many excellent final words now. I would like to invite the other speakers to give us just one sentence. If there was like this fairy queen in front of you asking you, okay, what would you wish for the European research area, what would be your biggest wish that you would have to the community? And I would like to start with Elena, just maybe one sentence, your final recommendations or dream. It could be a vision, whatever you want to share with us.
So as a scientist, I would really prefer that the things change and that we are not just publish and perish, but that the research and innovation should be given not only to us as a scientist, as a small group, but to the whole society. And things that can be changed if we change the metric we are using now in science.
That's a big wish. Carolina, what about your wish or vision?
Unfortunately, I don't think I can say something much different. I think my vision is that when we produce knowledge and share it, that we feel rewarded enough and we don't need the stamp of a big name of a journal that means nothing, that just the sharing and that the good actions come out of that knowledge is enough.
Sounds good. Sounds like an excellent wish. Daniele, what is your final wish?
Citizen science and public participation are a sort of anticipatory experiences of what science can be in the future. And they show in practice that to change things, we need to merge narrative and experiences. Not only narrative, not only experience, but merging both. This is very important to change things.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I think what we all learned today is we should get together as much as we can with all the networks we have, with all the power we have. And this is a quote I liked again: let's constantly irritate bureaucracy. So let's work with the decision makers in order not to attack them, but to show them we have the knowledge, we have the best practice, we have the theory, we have the practitioners, and let's do this together. I guess this was a great way of joining forces of two European projects of ResBios and StepChange. And I'm very happy that we were able to do this as a team. And I would like to thank my team now, which is Amalia Vetzola and Christopher Stiles, who are our wonderful UC project officers who organized this webinar today. A big thank you goes to all the speakers. I learned a lot myself, which doesn't happen too often in this field, but today I was really inspired and took down a lot of notes. Let's keep the spirit and let's keep in touch. And I wish all of you a wonderful day. If you want to stay around and chat a bit, you can just stay in. We won't close right away, but thank you for this really exciting webinar and for your input. Have a wonderful afternoon, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you all. Thank you, Annette.